Princeton Futures, an organization of residents of Princeton Borough and Township with diverse backgrounds, interests, and talents, have grown out of a concern that much of the planning and proposed development of the critical downtown spaces have been proceeding in an unconnected manner. Princeton Futures' aim is to assist the municipal authorities in taking a forward-looking and more comprehensive approach. It needs to be an approach that takes into account the social, cultural, economical, and architectural factors involved as part of an integrated whole. In summary, Princeton Futures seeks to encourage and help bring about the development of relatively little open space in Princeton's downtown. Investigation and consultation undertaken by Princeton Future indicates that these objectives are achievable with good planning. More detailed studies and further involvement of all concerned parties are, however, clearly called for.
It's part of New Jersey, and New Jersey is the most densely populated state within reach. And we're, like every place else, we're growing. And not only are we growing people, but we're growing vehicle miles. Witherspoon Street is a cross-town artery, and we're going to be just inundated with traffic unless we make more plans to bypass Princeton and other measures.
Christine St. John, Prospect Avenue. I'm interested with what's going to happen to the hospital, or if it stays or if it goes. And one way or the other, I can see we're going to be needing a jitney, particularly if there are apartments down there. This has to be taken into the wider consideration with everything else.
Good morning, I'm Ann Yasuhara. My husband and I have lived on Pine Street for 30 years. First of all, I want to say Pine Street, and I think, is one of the most vital streets. It's only a block. As far as I can see, outside of the Witherspoon area, it's one of the most vital streets in town. We all know each other, we greet each other, we have block parties, we help each other out. I often walk down here, occasionally I drive. I also own property on Green Street because friends of mine live there, and I'm trying to make it possible. So I'm interested in this area. I'm very concerned that the area stay as vital as it is. I do not think big apartment buildings and so forth promote that, quite the contrary. We don't want to be like New Yorkers who don't even know who live on the same floor with them. I'm certainly concerned that the African American community, which has been here for so long, can stay here. I'm also concerned for the Latin American people who live there. I don't like to see them packed in, so I don't approve of that, but I think we need to have some space for them so that they can also have reasonable lives. I'm concerned as my neighbor, the man sitting in front of me, whose name I've already forgotten. People aren't talking about redevelopment. Redevelopment has tended to mean tear it down and do something different and don't worry about who was living there. I do worry about who was living there. I want to know that Shirley Satterfield is living in her house and the other people that I know from that community. I don't know how to make it happen. I don't know what's on people's minds when they say redevelopment. So I can't say anything against it because I don't get it yet. But I'm also very nervous about it.
Hi, my name is Bill Sutphin. I live in Princeton Township. I have served 21 years on the Princeton Cemetery Committee, and at the present time, I'm the counsel to the Borough Zoning Board of Adjustment. I'm here to listen today and not to speak. Thank you.
We want to come back up to this arc right here.
My name is Howard Endy. I live in Princeton Landing, and I work right near there on College Road. I'm an attorney, and I have lots of opportunities to be here in Princeton Street for a variety of meetings, lunches, etc. I'm here several times a week. My concern is getting here and the traffic situation. My most recent experience here before today was I was attending a meeting at Fellowship and Prayer headquarters at 291 Witherspoon Street. It's a lovely building. And as I drove there, I specifically went a slightly longer route, but one that would avoid the traffic. So I came around Valley Road. I think about that traffic flow all the time when I'm coming here, and I'm just interested in it. And because of my association with Fellowship, which is right near the hospital, I'm very interested in how that hospital can be helped, or whatever's going to happen there takes place.
Jeff Fury, 319 Witherspoon Street. Here because Witherspoon is the gateway into Princeton, and there's going to be a lot of changes here from the hospital to all the economics that have been occurring with the real estate, and see it occurring, how New Nance knocked down their building and put something else new. New condos, I guess, on the other side. Be part of the process of what's going on here. And with this process, it's more than just, the hospital's definitely very much part of this. There's other things going on, like the selling of the Sinclair house to the town topics, what's going to happen with that property, etc. That's why I'm here.
Pat Ramirez, I live on McLean Street. My most common walk is up down along the stretch where the most densely built group of rundown houses and crowding. And my experience, if I stop to reflect on it as I'm walking, is often sometimes sadness and concern about people who live there. But in addition to that, the sidewalks there are too narrow, not only rough, but they're too narrow to bear the traffic, the foot traffic there. So I'd like to see them widened. And it's particularly hard to walk on garbage collection days. Go to shake hands, and I'm wondering, is there a practical way to deal with that? Instead of having garbage cans in front of every house, could there be a collection area? And finally, I'll put in a plug for considering ending chain stores in Princeton. We really need Subway on Witherspoon Street.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Hendricks Davis, and I live on John Street. I've lived there for the past 21 years, so I'm a newcomer to town. I've been listening to the comments of everyone around the circle, and I guess I feel some encouragement, but also a little bit of anxiety about the potential for development on Witherspoon Street. I've heard Witherspoon Street described as the spine of Princeton. And I was sitting here trying to remember my nursery school rhyme. This is a very appropriate place for it in the library. The neck bone's connected to the, and I just couldn't get it. What's the spine connected to? Well, I don't know. But anyway, it's connected to everything. And it certainly is influential of everything, including John Street. One of my Witherspoon experiences on John Street is that connection of traffic. People are becoming very savvy about how to get around Princeton. And even people who don't live in Princeton are becoming very savvy about it. And so, because the traffic perhaps inhibits their speedy progress along Witherspoon, they find their way over to John Street, and they're not quite as inhibited there in speeding down John Street. So indeed, the spine is connected to other parts of the community in which we live. I have a very curious sort of pondering or question, and it's about preservation, but maybe even more so restoration. And somebody might be able to answer this question for me, not in this context, but after the meeting. The naming of things. Tory Lane. Okay, if somebody after the meeting can tell me that, I would appreciate it very much. Okay, and one of the other concerns that I have in terms of very specific things, as any sort of renovation or demolition or change occurs in the physical properties, I want to make sure that there are, where's that anthropologist and an archaeologist around? Seriously, quite seriously, because it was indeed African Lane. Who knows what sort of things are being scooped up in big buckets and carted off without anybody ever taking a look to see what might be in the supposed rubble there. So that's something that I want to put out there for consideration as we are, any change that's being made, that the historians and the archaeologists and the anthropologists really tap into that very, very clearly to make sure that we're not missing things that we will wish we didn't. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marvin Israel on Willow Street. That's the small street by St. Paul's Church. I am a little skeptical of things that come from Princeton Future. They supported the development of the apartment buildings that are going up, which brings a whole lot of traffic, which will bring a whole lot of traffic to town, in spite of the quotation that they have in their booklet of people from Princeton Future meetings being concerned about traffic. Almost everybody here mentioned traffic. And it seems to me that putting the apartment buildings up, right, there's going to be another one across the way from this one that you see out the windows here, will only make the situation dramatically worse. On a positive note, I would recommend some of the restaurants besides Conti's on Witherspoon Street. There's a small Spanish restaurant, which is the only place in town you can get fresh cantaloupe juice and many other fresh fruit drinks, as well as marinated pork sandwiches, which I'm particularly fond of.
Hi, I'm Lily Israel. Marvin is my husband. We live at Willow Street. Willow is right off Moore Street, actually. I have a few observations and images. I'm from New York City. My husband is from Chicago. This is our second time back to Princeton. Originally, we lived on Madison Street, and that was a wonderful street. And I thought it was just too long a commute. I work in Manhattan. And then we, about 4 or 5 years ago, actually gravitated back to Princeton because it is a walking town, and we will live in no other place but a walking town, and my husband requires a university. Bookstores, I should say. So so the last time I was on Witherspoon Street was because I broke my finger after I broke my wrist, actually. And so we went to the hospital, and I just said to myself, what is my image of, or my feelings about Witherspoon? And for me, Witherspoon ends actually at the Witherspoon Bakery, and that's probably unfortunate for me, because I sort of think about Witherspoon as sort of a, you start on Nassau, and it's in the spring anyway, it's like seeing a bride in her bower. There's nothing more beautiful than pear trees, and we're lucky enough to live on Moore, which is also quite bridely. But if my image of Witherspoon ends at the Witherspoon Bakery, I don't, and then I say, well, where was I in my last experience? Well, that was at the hospital, and I don't consider the hospital Witherspoon Street. I was at the hospital. So for me, there's a real disconnect in terms of walking in Princeton. I stop at the bakery, and for the other places on Witherspoon, I do not walk. I feel that the woman who just mentioned about the streets being narrow, that's one reason that the Witherspoon streets from Nassau down to the Witherspoon Bakery are fairly wide and beckon of walking in them. The streets from parallel to the cemetery do not inspire and beckon people to walk. And I think that my feelings and my instincts about the redeveloping neighborhoods actually that there's a real leaning toward commercialization. I think that the only thing that keeps a town vibrant, we saw that in New Brunswick where we used to live, the only thing that keeps a town vibrant are people living in the town. And living, I mean it.
My name is Jack Roberts. I'm the Recreation Director for the borough and the township. Probably Witherspoon Street doesn't affect us directly, but as an ancillary problem that we agonize over as a board really deals with Community Park South and with the pool and the tennis courts, which still, I think, represent pretty much the flagship of what the Recreation Department offers the communities. And dilemmas that face us. Community Park as a field space is under increasing demand continually. It is not the most perfect field space. It is a field space that should be offered to the full community. But all that being said, we have another community that lives next door that looks at it as a neighborhood park. How do we mix improving the facilities and services that we offer to the community and also to that neighborhood that perhaps is not as ambulatory as other neighborhoods? How do we do that and not increase the traffic and the congestion that is already an issue for that neighborhood and for Witherspoon Street? So the Recreation Board and Department agonize over this and have plans, many conceptual plans to try to improve the services that we offer to the community, but are always perplexed by the fact that there are different strains of equations that do not meet in the middle, and this is something we deal with on a continual basis. From a personal standpoint, my waistline will attest to the fact that I take too many trips to Molisana Deli from my office, so that's pretty much all I have to say.
Good morning, my name is Maria Hoya. I apologize for my laryngitis. I live in the township, but I work in the borough. And my most recent experience on Witherspoon Street was the day, actually a week ago, when we had a march through town to protest the immigration raid that occurred about a month ago, and to ask for immigration reform from our federal government. It was a wonderful experience. Princeton really turned out in full force to support these issues, and we had a rally in front of Borough Hall in which our mayor and several council members spoke in favor of our goals, and within 2 days, Borough Council also passed a very supportive resolution sending a very strong message to the government. These issues affect the Latino community that resides in the John Witherspoon area very much. It is unfortunate that our current federal legislation is such that it keeps many of these individuals at the margins of our society, and therefore the Latino community in Princeton finds it very hard to take roots and to feel a part of the community. And this is something beyond what we as the community can do, even though we are doing something to express our displeasure to the federal government about it. But when we talk about the lack of involvement of the Latino community, we have to put this in the context of the fact that they are excluded by our current legislation from really being full-fledged members. one thing we're seeing is that when families finally do settle down and are economically in a position to buy a home, they are forced to move out of town into other areas because they can't afford housing here. So there are very few Latino families who've been in Princeton for any length of time. Once they have the wherewithal, they move out, and it's very unfortunate. But that's the state of affairs, and we are hoping that if we continue to pressure the government, maybe some changes will happen.
My name is Charlotte Bialik. I live on Jefferson Road, but in a sense I also live on Witherspoon Street. I eat breakfast there almost every single day. I walk and drive and never ride a bicycle. It's the most unbelievably dangerous town for bicycle riders. I love Witherspoon Street, but I do see it as three areas. There is the retail area where I spend most of my time, from the library on up to the university. There's the neighborhood, which I treasure tremendously and would hate to see damaged and lost. To me, that neighborhood is the history of Princeton and something we should be proud of. I agree entirely, having personal interests in archaeology, that we should really be talking to some experts about how to look at what we have and what we can save and actually treasure and understand better before we start knocking things down. And then we have the third area of Witherspoon Street, which I think of as the institutional end of Witherspoon Street: Community Park School, Valley Road, the hospital, the Township Hall. I am a member of the school board. I'm eternally, and every time I hear Princeton Future, disappointed because they never want to include the school board in any of these discussions on Witherspoon Street, and yet we hold an extremely interesting property at the other end of Witherspoon Street, and I believe are key to the discussion of what happens on this street, and I think need to be included as more specifically in some of those discussions.
Hi, my name is Heidi Fichtenbaum, and I live at 38 Carnahan Place, which is a small street right by Conti's Pizza, if you don't know where that is. And so I use Witherspoon Street every single day because it's my main route to and from my home. And my impressions of Witherspoon are small children walking to school, uneven sidewalks, porches filled with people, rough road, homes and shops needing repairs, and great trees. Those are my mental images of Witherspoon Street. They kind of all just blend together. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is all of the things that people have mentioned here, what's going to happen with the Valley Road building, what's going to happen with the hospital. Town Topics has recently bought a home where Mr. Robinson lived for many, many years, directly across from the community park school. We were friends with him, friends with his daughters. And the master plan says, these are supposed to remain residential areas, but I sort of see it being gobbled up and used in ways where the community is being eroded, and then the people, the businesses that move in there aren't maybe as concerned about that community and what their building looks like and how they relate, and how when they turn off the lights at 5 o'clock and go home, they make the street look kind of abandoned. All of those things are all on my mind. And one of the things, however, that I'm really, really encouraged about are all the people in this room today. It's awesome to see all of these neighbors here and to know that all of us, we are the community. we are that vibrancy. We are those people on those porches, on the street. And it is maintaining our connections as human beings that will maintain this community. That's what it's all about. That's why the physical changes that people discuss have to keep that as the absolute top priority, because that's what makes community. I know that I was recently at a meeting regarding the hospital, and I was referencing what happened in the 60s, what they called urban renewal, but was really urban removal. And there were a lot of communities that were, you know, economically low on the totem pole. And what happened was that they knocked those communities down and built things like Pruitt-Igoe, where there really was no community left. People didn't know who their neighbors were anymore. And they concentrated, you know, all of the negative aspects together, and they lost any of the positive aspects that existed in those communities instead of supporting those communities and allowing them to become strong and vibrant communities and maintaining the human connection. They knocked them down, and it was irreplaceable, absolutely irreplaceable. We'd never get those communities back again. And so it's, you know, the historic quality of the buildings, but it's also these connections that people have. And so you have to be very, very careful what you take down and what you replace it with, because whatever it is, it has to maintain that human connection.
Antonio Reinero, also from Carnaval Street. My latest experience is going through Witherspoon across Master Street to reach the main university campus, and the very heavy traffic and time-consuming that it takes to go across, especially around 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. I supported most, I have second most of the comments regarding the need for improvement in the road conditions and the sidewalks. But I think that is, as somebody said, that's not development, that's just improvement of existing conditions. And I also agree with that development has to be very clearly defined as to whether it means removal of neighborhoods for the enhancement of retail stores. I read here in one of the Princeton Future mission statement that one of the goals of the development of Princeton has to do with reaching and doing it in a manner that is economically advantageous to the poor. And that, to me, implies having retail stores that will increase tax revenue for the borough. By consequence, removing neighbors and their houses because they don't provide that much tax revenue. I was at a meeting a few days ago about what would happen to the hospital, and somebody who was supposed to be discussing possibility for expansion of the hospital proposed as a possibility the idea of expanding the hospital into neighborhoods toward across Harris, toward Franklin. So it's somewhat like developing the area at the cost of the neighborhood, so it can be beautified for other people who don't live in the township, who can come to visit and shop and go to a restaurant at the expense of people who live in the town. I think that has to be more carefully defined.
Well, as two people have already said, and I would add a third, I think this has been quite awesome. The stories that we have heard.
No, we have one person who hasn't spoken. Len Newton. Sorry. Oh, because of my turn. Anyone who hasn't spoken will.
No, I thought you were using your mic.
no, I have one. I'm wired.
Lee Peterson, I was a little bit late, sorry about that. I live on Birch Avenue, about 3 houses in from Witherspoon, so I really consider Witherspoon where I live. And I take Witherspoon every day. I take the Dinky to Manhattan. I work in Manhattan. I don't want to live in Manhattan. I don't want my neighborhood to become Manhattan. I don't want a Starbucks. I don't want 3 Starbucks in town. 1 is enough. I mean, I love Starbucks, don't get me wrong. I have nothing against it, but part of the beauty about Princeton that you don't see in towns like Millburn and Short Hills, where we could live and I have a much shorter commute, is that Princeton seems to treasure its diversity. And when I hear people saying urban renewal and redevelopment, that's really just a euphemism for commercialization. That's all that means. And you know, they're trying to wrap this in nice sounding words and innocuous words that, oh, maybe we can convince everybody that that's not really what we want to do. And I was at the meeting on Wednesday night with the hospital. The hospital didn't show anything that resembled what the picture in the town topics looked like. And if any of you saw that, that showed not only closing Franklin Avenue, but it also showed putting up medical buildings on our side of Witherspoon Street and 2 more parking garages. So say the hospital expands and it puts up all those buildings, then we commercialize Witherspoon Street. What's the next street? Do we take out John Street? Do we turn all of Birch Avenue into commercial space? Because now we have a nightclub building down at the end of the street. And why do we talk about what's really going on? I mean, is the intention to turn that entire neighborhood into a commercial area?
Yes.
Ultimately. Or is the intention of what those of us who are here representing the neighborhood want, which is to keep it a residential area, because there are 2 Witherspoon streets. There's not 1. Our side of Witherspoon is different, and it could even have a different name. And as Ms. Israel said, a lot of people wouldn't even realize it, because most people think of Witherspoon Street as the commercial district. And I typically avoid that. I don't know all of my neighbors, but I walk my dog, I walk to the Dinky, I drive if I'm running late in the morning. But everyone says hi. People sit, the guys who are waiting to get picked up in the morning at 6:30 when I'm walking, or if I walk my dog at 6 o'clock and they're waiting, they pet my dog. We may not, maybe we don't speak the same language, but they're extremely friendly. They're very nice people. And that's what draws me to Princeton. That's why I live here and not in northern Jersey and not in West Windsor, where nobody knows anybody, where it's just, I hate to see this town go the way of all the other towns, because it's one of the last ones in the state that has this kind of character, that really has been able to preserve it despite all of the outside pressures to change. And it really would be a shame to see this happen and to see us lose this, because we're pretty much the last bastion of principled development, I think. I don't know how else to describe it, but I really would hate to see this become a commercial corridor. I just think it would be a real shame.
Well, let me just say one more thing to summarize my some thoughts on this side, so to speak, although we're all in the circle. I would like to remind you all came to this meeting ourselves and have chosen to be involved in it. I mean, we came here this morning to listen to everyone. So what was just said, issues about redevelopment, are considered as important input into what we are trying to do in the study. I mean, we are here to try to provide a process in which the community can continue this discussion. In my own personal case, I would say, grew out of a study I once made when the, what I call the Shirley McLean project came up with the project on Plain Street and Shirley Street for development of the houses, and I studied the neighborhood myself in order to provide the design, and I came up with the idea that this was the neighborhood on the planet, I felt, that I could categorize as the neighborhood of happy porches. That it had shown so much civic energy by each individual in that community that was expressed on their porch, that it was truly remarkable. The other is that there is a sign on that street of a family who lives on that street. It seemed to me to be a symbol of what it is that we had to accomplish in terms of stability and preservation. So we're not here to have any other agenda except to listen, to try to go forward with you. This did take most of our scheduled time. attendant. We could have more trees. So, yes.
Well, I should know, Michael is at his office prepared several maps which will become the tools for our looking at various levels and layers of conditions on the street. A lot of issues certainly go beyond the street. We've heard talk about specific properties and property development. But what I think he wants us all to sort of get grounded in is the fact that there are varied uses, systems of not only walking and driving, but buses and bicycles and other modes that are struggling to maintain a presence and provide the balance of access and traversing through. So
I'll talk about that. In order to try to concretize what it is that came up at a meeting like this, we came up with the idea that our study is really going to be in 4 parts. First, we'll have a series of neighborhood discussion sessions, which were outlined in the town topics. We're going to have workshops in which we'll try to get people around smaller tables, in which we can contribute and discuss in more concrete ways the issues that you came up with today. And of course, there will be more. We will then try to document those in terms of areas that will isolate and identify places of conservation, preservation, improvement primarily. And I think it's unwise for us to be Pollyannish about this and think that we can prevent what is allowed in terms of development in the zoning now that could take place even while we're studying, although we can make recommendations concerning future development. And then we want to create a series of design parameters and criteria that we feel should be addressed. I mean, I heard one today was, if you look at this drawing here, what is interesting about it, I think, in a way, and it came out in our discussion, that this is a rainbow of sorts, and it's threatened because of its rainbow character. But if one of those arcs in the rainbow either disappears, then it's not a rainbow, or dominates and becomes one color, then it's not a rainbow. So this was to me a great symbol. This was just a chart of the different uses and different colors that showed the character that came out in the discussion today. We then mapped that on this just to give a clue so people could begin to visualize. What we're going to try to do is working from a series of very specific, what I call maps. The first map would grow out of much of what we talked about today. That would include street paving, sidewalks, sitting areas, piazzas, and plazas. That would identify how we can improve the viability, and this is where I meant viability, of, for example, the impact between bicyclists, pedestrians, and automobiles, and people sitting on the ground waiting for buses, and people sitting on their porches watching the passing parade. That map, to me, was the first most significant one. We have to find a way of utilizing the ground in a way that remains useful, but yet is beautiful, and incorporates many uses. That would be incorporated with a landscape plan, and then a street furniture plan. So that the first idea set would come about and lighting, trying to address the issues that we experience, and a lot of that came out today. So those would be isolated on the larger segment of this map, and that's where, as we were able to get from Chris and from our counterpart in the township, the actual facts of the matter, and we will isolate those so that we can work more in a design mode and an analytic mode with specific information. Now, transportation is, of course, an important part of the study, and we will definitely have to deal with this map and this map. This map just begins to show the overall grid of the community, and you can see the particularity of this neighborhood in the sense that it is a unique neighborhood bounded by 2 streets, one of which is that artery into town that was spoken of, and the other which is increasingly being used for both utility access and automobile access. And if anything were to happen over here, certainly we would want to investigate what that impact would be, because this neighborhood is just a dream. So we would be impacted by the development over in Stanwood and over to the Y. And of course, then over here is 206, and here's Nassau Street down here. So we will have to come to grips with the traffic issue as well. Utilities would follow along with that. These are the infrastructural maps. And then there's a set of structuring maps. All of this has to be translated somewhat professionally into issues and parameters that can be defined through land use, densities, zoning, and building types. So out of this, that's primarily where our professional group will try to deal with issues, as well as, of course, a part of the zoning would be set back in front. We hope to provide a series of cross-sections that would guide the community in the development of these issues, so that the landscaping and the trees would be preserved, the sidewalks, the street, everything would be shown in a series of cross-sections and three-dimensional views that would allow us to present these ideas. Another important map is a map that we want to try to develop a history trail, and that would respect the neighborhood and yet identify the neighborhood for its critical importance in the history of Princeton and the nation. And then finally, our last map would try, it's not so much of a map, perhaps, but a map is something we tend to think of that we follow, that would outline zones, forms, strategies, agents, and methods of implementation with some milestones of perhaps a year, 5 years, 10 years, by which we can begin to implement it. Yes?
I have a question. I think there's some simple things that you could do, like recommend to the zoning boards that there should be no new development that increases population density. That's simple, right? If we wait 10 years, for Princeton Future's plan, many of the structures that we're talking, there's another thing you can do. You can recommend no destruction of any existing viable structure to put up a new structure, right? That's very simple. In other words, instead of talking about having plazas with, where people can, like this plaza that we're going to have over here, instead of doing that, just put down benches by the bus stops, as was recommended. So there's a lot of simple things to preserve the existing neighborhoods that you're talking about. When you mention a history trail to me, that's scary, because what you're going to be doing is pointing out and having plaques where things used to be, right? Not where things are today. And that means to me that this is going to be turned into a town that's great for Hillier, but not so good for me as a resident, and for the other people that even live closer to that neighborhood.
Well, I mean, we're trying to listen to that. But the only thing I would say is that...
Wait, may I say something? Michael responds by, we'll try to listen to that. You're here this morning, Michael, to listen to it. Not try to listen to it. I mean, one of the things that I abhor about Princeton Future is its assumption that it knows all that's right for you. Now, I say I abhor it. My name's listed in the manual. I'm not an active member any longer. And I think by virtue of the fact that, as Heidi says, an awesome turnout, I would love to have this awesome turnout make some impression on what you think you're about to do. Don't snow us with pretty maps. You're getting paid to do that. The point to be made is to try to reflect what these people have said. That's the intent of input. That's what Princeton Future said at the outset. We will listen to the neighbors, we will listen to the people, and we will be governed accordingly. The last is what I'm paraphrasing. The point I'm trying to make is a rejoinder that says we will try to do it. Why are these people here? They will dictate, in my opinion, if you do this thing in the manner you purport to do it, they will dictate what you will take and refine and whatever you want to do with it, but come up with the reflection of people. That's the point.
I agree. I have no for.
Well, then I think you can kind of call it a day and take what's been said and go work on it.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
I have a question for the people, the homeowners. Most of us in this room are homeowners. What legal restrictions you would put on your house at the time of sale in terms of what can happen to it after you sell it? Let's say you are in a residential business district or in residential with certain density. What would you do? And I would like to hear from my neighbors and people, what would you do when you thought of your property values if the area was down zone? That is a factor when we talk about preservation of the neighborhood, how you balance that with your property value and your freedom to do what you can with your property. So please think about that.
I think we've all heard that Witherspoon Street is the spine, but the community is the backbone. And the community is made up of the neighborhoods, not the township, not the borough, the community. One of the things that we heard the other night at the hospital meeting from a paid consultant by the task force was that certain sections of Witherspoon Street and the areas surrounding the hospital are defined as blighted. My neighborhood's not blighted. I find it hard to believe that the task force considers certain sections of the township and borough to be blighted. And I think that this group has an uphill battle because the minds of the people who we've elected to represent us are already made up. Thank you.
If I could just clarify one thing. I think if you're referring to the gentleman who was on the task force that made some comments at the task force meeting the other night, he's not a paid consultant. I don't know if you're talking about Carlos or something. He is not a paid consultant. He is a member of the task force. Okay.
Chair of the voting board of the township. Yes.
A couple comments. First of all, comment is I live on Harris Road. I'm Jane Liberty. I live in one of the very small cottages on Harris. When I moved in, I had every intention of renovating it. I've had many people tell me to tear it down. I choose not to. I am taking it and with the hope that I get my permits approved when I submit them and make it into a house that will be reflective of the neighborhood. I've had the neighbors approve the drawings and say that it will only improve it. What I would hate to see for the rest of the Witherspoon neighborhoods is what is happening on Harris Road. The houses across the street from us are sitting empty. Nobody can decide what to do with those houses until something is decided about the hospital. I would certainly hate to see other neighborhoods encroached on and then left to become blighted. I don't consider the road across from me, even though I intend to make a substantial investment into this home. Anything but. So I caution the members of all task force to be careful that they don't move into the neighborhood and then leave it standing to fall down. And then there is no recourse but to move forward and tear the houses down and do something that most neighborhoods would not want to see.
Thank you. One thing I forgot to mention when I spoke earlier that I was prompted to think of again, given some of the comments that have been made, including some interesting thoughts on how a homeowner might impose some kind of restrictions on the use of their property when they sell it, I think that's very limited in terms of what the law allows. But I think there's a couple avenues that can be used to address or to mitigate the changes that are these economic and social pressures are putting on the area. One is the zoning board, I think, is a real key to the changes that are happening. And I think whenever they get a request for spot zoning changes, they should consider them in light of the overall big picture of the impact on the neighborhoods. Now, I know the laws prevent them from going very far in doing that because a property owner with commercial interests can always sue, and they typically do at the drop of a hat if they can't get their way. And the laws meant to protect individual rights sometimes allow changes that are not really good for the community as a whole. So besides the zoning board focusing more on the big picture, I think also the zoning laws need to be addressed and possibly changed to help prevent negative changes in the area that the commercial property owners think are good. And I think there's two aspects. The zoning board and the zoning laws should be looked at hard, and thoughts should be given to how to change them to make things work better.
I think we're going to try to close out today's meeting. We have a series of meetings that are going to be numerous, and as the gentleman said, they seem to be an uphill battle. You're speaking of one development potential at one property, and there are multiples up and down the street. It's true that the big picture is what we're trying to work from, and maybe it's not really clear in the processes that we find ourselves engaged in, whether it's zoning or planning process to all of us, or whether it's actually what the community is looking to continue to put forth. Marvin Reed, who is chair of the master plan subcommittee of the planning board, has certainly a role in this, in that the problem with getting people involved in a process that keeps that up to date to what people are current and most interested in maintaining is that those meetings are Tuesday mornings. If you complain about Saturday mornings, that Tuesday morning you'll never get to. And it's why Princeton Future is trying to be most flexible in keeping a target, not only a target, but established dates and engage in a process where people have a chance to say all of the things that have been said and collectively come to some agreement on how we want to proceed. The next meeting is December 4th. This is the beginning of what's called neighborhood workshops. This was really would like people who are closest to, as well as the whole community, to be there. They have more than anecdotal, they have factual, detailed information that provides a lot of input on how we all perceive and may interact with the street. The 4th, the 11th, and the 18th, again, Saturday mornings here at the library. In January 15th, we will convene again with summaries of those neighborhood meetings. We'll bring forth in March concepts and visual aids expressing what we've heard as the vision, whether it's the current snapshot repeated or whether it's a little tweaking here and there, it will come from your contributions. On April, there will be further development scenarios presented, and the final proposals put forth in May. And we're, as I said earlier, looking forward to the participation of commissions and boards who are engaged in implementing what we want to make sure it is a will of the people that they're implementing. We're going to conclude this session, but what I wanted to repeat, and each of you should have the questions and keep those in mind, that you can continue to communicate through princetonfuture@yahoo.com, or you can mail to the post office box 493. We all see each other on the streets all the time, so I know we will continue the conversation on a daily basis. But we thank you for coming today, and look forward to seeing everyone in December.
I know you're trying to wind this up, and I apologize for my ignorance, but for those of us who don't understand, since it's come up a couple of times, I was just wondering if before we left, one of the officials who are here could explain what it is that's been declared blighted and...
Nothing has been declared
Oh, nothing.
blighted. That was
Okay.
That's
a
very
comment
subtle.
last night, at Thursday night's meeting.
Okay.
The hospital task force.
All right.
Marvin, do you want to explain what was said?
I think what was said, and that some people may have assumed, I think one of the references was specifically to the Harris Road houses on the west side of Harris Road, or by the medical center. And Mildred Trotman made reference to one of our, Carlos, one of our task force members, was making a valiant effort, because the meeting we had in October said that the master plan now says that the hospital is expected to stay within its block. And they said if they were to modernize their facilities, as they really feel they have to do to remain competitive, that in order to stay within the block, they could probably put an addition where the medical arts building, the old medical arts building is, which is going to come down in its entire, those buildings, the medical arts buildings, are ready for replacement, not just rehabilitation. They're in very bad shape. So they proposed a new building that would add on to the existing hospital, and they said it would have to be 13 stories high. Now, some people that are here today that were at that meeting thought that 13 stories was a bit higher than most of the other buildings in town. So when we came back at the meeting on Thursday night, Carlos wanted us to make a very valiant effort. If instead of going up and forcing them to stay within the block, could they go out a little bit? And so he was examining properties on each side of the street. He looked at the Princeton Packet parking lot, which people said, no matter what happens, probably ought to become something other than the Princeton Packet parking lot. But he also commented on the fact that the houses on Harris Road, that the hospital had sort of left them in such shabby condition. And he said, shouldn't we just face the fact that we should expand in that direction? Now, there's a lot of debate about that. There's debate within the task force about that. There was debate at the meeting on that. And the same thing applies on the other side of the street. The borough's affordable housing, Maple Terrace and Franklin Terrace. In one way or the other, they probably have to be rehabilitated, if nothing else. But there's also the possibility that they might be replaced. And then the properties that on the west side of Witherspoon Street, if nothing happens, they should at least be, I'll call it reinvigorated, because the hospital is right across the street from them. They've been sort of languished there. The delicatessen that's there, it's quaint, and it has character to it. And so, but what happens in the process of all this? If nothing else, it gets its sidewalk fixed. Now, some people interpreted that exercise to mean he was implying that it was blighted.
Marvin, he said, he didn't say blighted.
Yeah.
He said that these neighborhoods and these areas are unsightly. Okay, that's the exact.
That's what he
word
said.
that is.
Yes.
And subject to redevelopment.
And subject to redevelopment. And what happens when people use those words, the rest of us all read into that, well, what is he really saying? And what he's really saying is it's blighted, tear it down. My kids use the deli like constantly, you know. Yeah, could they use a better sidewalk and whatever? And as my husband said, those are improvements that I don't think anybody in the neighborhood would say, oh yeah, well we love our uneven sidewalks.
All right. You're right. All right.
Nobody's gonna say that, okay?
Right.
But nobody wants our neighborhood torn down. Period.
And there were a number of people that came to the meeting to say that, and it's been very important in terms of that discussion that we're having, and that that discussion vis-a-vis the hospital. Because if the hospital moves away, something else is going to come in its place. And at our next meeting on December 8th, it'll probably be at Township Hall, so watch the papers, we're going to look at alternatives, not just a hospital, but what could come in its place. And from your comments, it's obvious it's not just what comes in its place, but how it comes in its place.
How much do you have to pay for it? How much do you have to pay for one of these babies?
And how does whatever is there, whether it's a modernized hospital or some replacement development, how does it fit in and interact with that neighborhood so it's an integral part of the neighborhood and works with the neighborhood and supplements it? And I know that's what we're going to be addressing.
And thank you.